Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear and respected viewers, I welcome you to the next segment of Dabistan-e-Iqbal's serialized presentation on Quaid Azam Jinnah's action-packed and illustrious life. In today's presentation, we shall be covering the following areas or following parts of his glorious life, which were all very meaningful. Famous 14 points which happened to be a great political initiative by this great leader. His own domestic life under the heading of loving an idyllic marriage, which was unfortunately marred by a very sad end. The Allahabad resolution by Allama Iqbal, again a epoch-making event in the history of the creation of Pakistan, and first roundtable conference in London which took place in November 1930. Second roundtable conference which took place in autumn 1931. Jinnah's ultimate perspective on Hindu designs. Finally, the visit back home. Coming first to Jinnah's 14 points, when the adjourned session of the League met at Delhi in March 1929, it met as a very weakened organization, its representative character challenged by a hostile press, and Jinnah faced with the challenge to steer the ship of Muslim League's destiny through stormy weather, for the purpose of retrieving a difficult situation and succeeding in rallying around the League the maximum support possible from Muslims of the subcontinent. He drafted a compromise resolution for adoption in the open session of the League, emphasizing in categoric terms the rejection of Nehru report, which was the main theme of his presentation. The operative part of the resolution contained 14 basic principles meant to safeguard the rights and interests of Muslims. These 14 provisions, inter alia, demanded not less than 1/3 representation for Muslims in the Central Legislative Assembly, separate electorates, liberty of religious belief, worship, and observance of religious practices to all communities. Sindh shall be a separate province was one of the areas that stood out distinctly. Reforms to be introduced in the frontier province and Balochistan, which was considered more backward than the rest of subcontinent. Adequate share to Muslims in the services, adequate provision in the constitution to safeguard and protect Muslim culture, promotion of Muslim education, language, religion, personal laws. 1/3 Muslim representation in all cabinets, both central as well as provincial. The resolution, my dear viewers, demanded continuance of separate electorates guaranteed to Muslims since 1909. And the words were, till such time as the Muslims chose to abandon it, the Muslims will not accept joint electorates unless Sindh is actually constituted into a separate province, and reforms, in fact, are introduced in the NWFP, that is the frontier province, as well as Balochistan. The question of weightage to Muslims in minority provinces was to be considered thereafter. The resolution, after being moved and debated, was referred to a committee consisting of Mr. Jinnah, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Maulana Muhammad Ali, Malik Barkat Ali, Nawab Ismail Khan, Dr. Shafat Ahmad Khan, and Dr. Kichlu. In the midst of the intense political fray that Jinnah was involved in, we must turn the page for a short while towards his private life, and as I said, his loving and idyllic marriage, which became a talk of the entire Bombay city, was marred by a very sad end. Whenever and wherever Jinnah went, his loving spouse was with him always, whether it was in Delhi or in some other city, to attend meetings of the Muslim League or other political organizations. It was obvious they were living their lives as inseparables. Sir Dinshaw and Lady Pettit had reconciled themselves to the inevitable and were now on friendly terms with their only daughter and their distinguished son-in-law. On 15th August 1919 was born Dina, the only child of this love marriage, and it was only natural that the two, husband and wife, showered all their love and care on her. But strangely, for reasons never fully understood, even this firm bond of attachment proved too feeble to keep together two such strong personalities as Jinnah and Ratanbai Pettit. One wonders if it will ever be told as to what were the real causes that sowed the seeds of dissension between the two, and what was the immediate and final cause of the two drifting apart permanently. But the stormy romance ended prematurely. Once Jinnah had gone to Delhi along with his wife for an assembly session, and when the two returned to Bombay, the wife took a car at the station to go straight to the Taj Hotel, where she was to live continuously for some years, separate from her husband. Although they lived apart, they continued to be on visiting terms. While the two were living separately, Dina Jinnah was being taken care of by the father, who gave priority to his daughter's education and upbringing. Dina was lodged in a boarding house in England. Whenever Jinnah visited England with his sister, Dina would spend her holidays with her father and her aunt. Dina had developed strong bonds of love and affection for her paternal family. Dear viewers, while Jinnah was on his annual holiday in England, he learned through a trusted friend about Ruti's illness and admission in a Paris hospital. He rushed to Paris from Ireland, where he was holidaying at that time. Jinnah arranged better medical care for Ruti, who began to recover. However, Ruti returned to India earlier than Jinnah, and instead of going to her marriage home on Mount Pleasant, she preferred to live with her brother. Sometime in February 1929, the Quaid was in Delhi attending a session of the Imperial Assembly when he received a telegram saying Mrs. Jinnah was very seriously ill. He left all his work and rushed back to Bombay, only to reach that city too late. He sat in sorrowful silence for some time beside her dead body, and then accompanied the funeral procession to Aram Bagh in Bombay, where she lies buried. Before her death, Ratibai had written a letter to Jinnah, which explicitly expressed her love and reverence for her husband. The letter read as follows:
Darling, thank you for all you have done. If ever in my bearing your once tuned senses found any irritability or unkindness, be assured that in my heart there was place only for a great tenderness and a greater pain, a pain, my love, without hurt. When one has been as near to the reality of life, which after all is death, as I have been, dearest, one only remembers the beautiful and tender moments, and all the rest becomes a half-veiled mist of unrealities. Try and remember me, beloved, as the flower you plucked and not the flower you tread upon. I have suffered much, sweetheart, because I have loved much. The measure of my agony has been in accord to the measure of my love. Darling, I love you, and had I loved you just a little less, I might have remained with you. Only after one has created a very beautiful blossom, one does not drag it through the mire. The higher you set your ideal, the lower it falls. I have loved you, my darling, as it is given to few men to be loved. I only beseech you that the tragedy which commenced in love should also end with it. Darling, good night and goodbye, Ruti.
When Ruti's body was lowered to be surrendered to Mother Earth, Jinnah could not restrain himself. He broke down, perhaps one of the very few times in his life, or presumably the only time. The Allahabad Resolution by Allama Iqbal, as I said, the epoch-making event which ultimately brought about the change, and every Muslim in the subcontinent rallied behind the demand for a separate Muslim state. At the behest of Jinnah, Allama Iqbal presided over the Allahabad session of the League in December 1930 and delivered a historic address which indicated guidelines for the future constitutional development of India. Insofar as Muslims were concerned, he boldly declared he was ready to stake his all for the freedom of India if the Muslims of India were assured of their own homeland by the amalgamation of the Punjab, Sindh, Frontier and Balochistan into a single Muslim state. He categorically declared to base a constitution on the conception of a homogeneous India, or to apply to India the principle dictated by British democratic sentiments, is to unwittingly prepare her for a civil war. Self-government with the British Empire or without it, the formation of a consolidated Northwest Indian Muslim state appears to be the final destiny of Muslims, at least of Northwest India. I therefore demand the formation of a consolidated Muslim state in the best interests of India and Islam. For India, it means security and peace resulting in an internal balance of power. For Islam, an opportunity to rid itself of the stamp that Arabian imperialism was forced to give it, to mobilize its laws, its education, its culture, and to bring them into closer contact with its own spirit and with the spirit of modern times. Dear viewers, the clear and definitive concept of Pakistan had taken place that day. Dear viewers, let us now review the proceedings of the first roundtable conference, which was held in London in November 1930. Jinnah was among the first to take the floor on the opening day, and while reciprocating sentiments of sincerity expressed by the British Prime Minister, he said, India expects translation and fulfillment of these declarations into action. I hope that all parties and interests and communities concerned will bring to bear upon the task before us all the assurances of mutual trust, practical sagacity and statesmanship which they can command. I am glad we are here to witness the birth of a new dominion of India. Jinnah's introductory remarks gave clear indication that he was at the Roundtable Conference to do some plain talking to the British. The first point I should like to deal with is the point with regard to the moral claims of Great Britain on the one side and the sins of omission and commission by Great Britain on the other. In a conference like this, one should put out point of view frankly and without wounding anybody's feelings, and therefore I shall avoid any kind of bitterness. Jinnah forcefully said, "Let me tell you, without mincing words, there is no section, there is not one section in India that has not emphatically declared that India must have a full measure of self-government." Dwelling at length on a constitution suitable for India, he further said, "You cannot possibly frame any constitution unless you have provided safeguards for the rights and interests which exist in India. First, there is the minority question. And unless you secure willing cooperation, allegiance to the state of the minorities, no constitution that you may frame will work successfully. The Muslims demand safeguards for their community." Expatiating upon his stance on the subject of defense, Jinnah said, "Sir, I want to make it clear that under this paragraph, what I understand is that when you say that the Governor General shall be responsible for defense, as far as I am concerned, it will only mean that so far as the control of the military is concerned, it will rest with him. But there will be many other questions which will come under the word defense, such as the question of Indianization, the question of the reconstitution or reorganization of the army, the question of the financial adjustments that may have to be made, the question of the use of the troops, questions with regard to the policy and legislation which may relate to defense." Sincere efforts were being made by some leading delegation and the delegates to the first roundtable conference to settle their differences and present a united front to the British government. The Nawab of Bhopal had its own house in London, and his residence became, along with the Aga Khan's suite at the Ritz, the center for all conciliation meetings, for which Muslim delegates had nominated the Quaid and the Aga Khan to represent their community. Except the extremist Hindus, all showed a conciliatory spirit to approach every issue in a helpful manner in order to arrive at unanimity. The Aga Khan wrote, "I am happy to think that when within the Muslim delegation we had made our decision in favor of federation, Mr. Jinnah was an inflexibly loyal and irreproachably helpful colleague throughout all the subsequent discussions and negotiations. Both the Quaid and the Aga Khan, on behalf of the Muslims, went to the furthest limit to accommodate the Hindus, among whom similar sentiment was reciprocated by a large number of Hindu representatives. Muslims were even prepared to accept joint electorates, but militant Hindu delegates did not yield to the just demands of the Muslims. In the absence of Hindu-Muslim unity, the real foundation for progressive reforms was lacking. Hindu Mahasabhites failed to rise to the occasion. The Aga Khan writes, "The acceptance denied us The rest of the first round table conference was not of much essential or practical importance, since the foundation on which its deliberations should have been built was vague and fragile instead of strong and firm. Coming now, my dear viewers, to second roundtable conference which took place in autumn 1931 from 7th September to 1st December 1931. The Viceroy of India and Aga Khan succeeded in personally persuading Gandhi that the Congress must attend the second roundtable conference. Gandhi left for London as the sole representative of the Congress and stayed in the East End with Muriel Leicester, one of the English admirers. Chamanlal Stalwart records an interesting incident at one of the meetings of the Hindu leaders where Gandhi was present. On another occasion, when Gandhi said something which betrayed want of knowledge of the bearings of the question that was being discussed, Chamanlal says, I asked him whether he had ever read the Government of India Act of 1919. He said he had not. Then I put to him, if so, how do you consider yourself competent to express an opinion on the present question, the consideration of which requires knowledge of the existing law? How very ironic, dear viewers, Gandhi was viewed by his devotees as a demigod. The Minorities Committee of the conference met on 28 September 1931, and on the request of Gandhi, it was agreed to adjourn it as he was in negotiation with the Quaid and the Aga Khan over this question. Mr. Jinnah and Sir Muhammad Shafi negotiating on one side and Mahatma Gandhi on the other. The story of these discussions is long and not, alas, particularly fruitful. The Congress held stubbornly to their one-nation theory, which Muslim leaders knew to be historically insupportable. The Aga Khan despaired over the attitude of the Congress, and Dr. Sita Ramaya explains, he, that is Gandhi, wanted an assurance from his Muslimans and Sikh friends that they would agree to any future constitution of India being fashioned only on the basis of Indian nationalism, untainted by any communal considerations. Having become thoroughly aware and cognizant of the attitude of Gandhi and his cohorts, one wonders how seriously Muslim League colleagues took Iqbal's words, which had been clearly pronounced in the Allahabad address in 1930. One wonders whether in those years of the early 30s, they realized that the Allahabad resolution was presented by the visionary poet and was the only way to come out of the quagmire that India was in. While the first round-table conference had been a partial success, unfortunately, the second round-table conference was an absolute dismal failure. Dear viewers, despite the stubborn stance of the Hindu delegates regarding Jinnah's attempts at Hindu-Muslim understanding, the Manchester Guardian, a famous newspaper, wrote, Mr. Jinnah's position at the roundtable conference was unique. The Hindus thought he was a Muslim communalist. The Muslims took him to be pro-Hindu. The princes deemed him to be democratic. The Britishers considered him a rabid extremist, with the result that he was everywhere but nowhere. None wanted him. Obviously, everyone overawed by Jinnah's charisma, which did not suit British interests. They took refuge behind complex rhetoric, acknowledging Jinnah's greatness, yet not giving him credit. What an ardent admirer had to say about Jinnah's performance? Let's hear it from Mrs. Sarojini Naidu, the Nightingale of India. I quote from her golden words: "The triple assets of a magnetic presence, an impressive delivery, and a voice which, while lacking in volume, has an arresting timbre. He has the cogent force of a brilliant advocate, and at round-table conferences his genius finds the fullest scope. His extraordinary powers of persuasion, his luminous exposition, his searching arguments, and his impeccable judgment are revealed at their best when he graces a committee with his august presence." Jinnah's ultimate perspective on Hindu design finally had taken concrete shape. Deliberations over the conference table had been a bitter revelation to the Quaid, who could clearly see Hindu ambition at work to dominate Indian politics through sheer force of numbers, in utter disregard of Muslim grievances and their aspirations. In January 1931, Jinnah settled along with his sister and daughter in London and started legal practice there. In a letter dated 31st March 1931 from London, he wrote to Mr. Abdul Mateen Chaudhary of Azam, "I have come to the conclusion that I can do more useful work here, at any rate for the present." Jinnah came to India in September 31, and in a public meeting in Bombay, he said, "I am an Indian first and a Muslim afterwards. But at the same time, I agree that no Indian can ever serve his country if he neglects the interests of the Muslims, because it is by making Muslims strong, by bringing them together, by encouraging them, and by making them useful citizens of the state, that you will be able to serve your country." What is a state? What is representative government? Does it mean that the 70 million Muslims should be tied hand and foot in a constitution where a particular class of Hindus can possibly tyrannize over and deal with them as they like? Is that representative government? Is that democratic government? Certainly not. Grave reality coming to the fore. This realization finally leads Jinnah towards his changed strategy. He continued, "I have no eye on any party. I have no mind for popularity. I can tell you honestly that the Hindus are foolish, utterly foolish in the attitude that they have adopted today. The bulk of the Hindus have lost their heads and their mentality. Perhaps you may not know, but I know it. I assure you that unless Hindus will have the courage and confidence, they are afraid of Muslims. This India will never get Swaraj. It is not the joint or separate electorates or 5 or 10 seats. Hindus have not the necessary courage, and Hindus are afraid of the Muslims." Finally, the visit back home. Once again, Chaudhary wrote to him that a large section of Muslims wanted him back. Jinnah wrote back on 27th April 1933, "I was asked to come to India, but to do what? There is nothing concrete." However, Quaid returned to India in April 1934, and he immediately plunged himself in active politics. Pyarelal writes, Jinnah, who had retired from politics and taken to Privy Council practice in England after the second Roundtable Conference, was invited to return to lead the Muslims. Presiding over the meeting of the Council of All India Muslim League in the same month, he exhorted the Muslims of India to sink their differences and to join the League, which alone could safeguard their rights and interests. The question before the Council was to define its attitude on the communal award, and its resolution on the subject highlighted it. He paid a glowing tribute to the growing political consciousness of Muslim India and condemning the communal award, and said in a press statement, "The problem of problems which still confronts us is how to avert the award being foisted upon India. That cannot be achieved until there is unity between Hindus and Muslims. Nothing will give me greater happiness than to bring about complete cooperation and friendship between Hindus and Muslims, for which, he said, he had the solid backing of Muslims." He continued, "Muslims are in no way behind any other community in their demand for national self-government. The crux of the whole issue, therefore, is whether we can completely assure Muslims that safeguards to which they attach vital importance will be embodied in the future Constitution of India." Jinnah got in touch with some Hindu leaders to bring into being a common platform between Hindus and Muslims to force the hand of the British before the reforms were announced. But all his efforts resulted in no concrete achievement. Unhappy over the state of affairs in India, he soon left for England. Dear viewers, this brings us to an end of this segment of our serialized presentation on Jinnah, the Quaid-e-Azam, wherein you would have become fully aware of the conviction and determination of our great leader towards achievement of balanced solutions to the quagmire through which aspiration of all religions and ethnic communities would have been suitably met. Thank you. Hope you would keenly look forward to our next segment and also give us feedback on this segment through your worthy comments. Thanks once again.